Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, Season 3, Episode 37, your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. Lo and behold, the Arizona Diamondbacks are in the World Series. They are the National League champions. Yes, I go through an entire segment that I recorded earlier this week, right after the Arizona Diamondbacks felled the Philadelphia Phillies. Naturally, and spoiler alert, I praise the Arizona Diamondback bullpen. This podcast is published on Saturday. It is Saturday, October the 28th, in the year of our Lord, 2023. October the 27th, the Arizona Diamondback bullpen blows the save in the ninth inning and then gives up a run to lose at Texas. So, yeah, once again, I was wrong. Though, I'm going to qualify that because I still believe in the Arizona Diamondback pitching staff, particularly their bullpen. They demonstrated in a blowout loss to the Philadelphia Phillies in Game 2 of that series that they can bounce back. The Diamondbacks have a lot of kids, but they are coachable kids, and they've got good coaches. They're going to make adjustments. They're going to be just fine. We will have the opportunity to judge that statement in a mere week. And the Native Americans, well, they may have something to say about it. What is the it in that statement? Stay tuned. Thank you for all my loyal and dear listeners. Please, if you haven't done it yet, like, subscribe, thumbs up, give 5 stars. Please send the podcast to friends, enemies alike, far and wide. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting This Is Why I Don't Vote is on Patreon. And away we go.
Act 1. The Arizona Diamondbacks are National League champions.
I am the champion. I am the champion. No time for losers, 'cause I am the champion of the world.
No, not of the world yet. The Arizona Diamondbacks, though, are the National League champions. And that is probably the biggest surprise to come out of the sports landscape. Well, since the St. Louis Blues won the Stanley Cup after being in last place in their own division at the All-Star break. This was a team that lost 110 baseball games in the year of our Lord 2021. This was a team that pundits picked last in their division, if not second to last. Yes, I think there were some people who were picking the Colorado Rockies to finish last, and in that vein, they were right. Were they right about the Arizona Diamondbacks? No, they were not. As my buddy Brian, who comes on the podcast, is the second of the two idiots that does the Two Idiots Discuss Sports Major League Baseball podcasts. As my buddy Brian said, the Diamondbacks are set up to be good for a long time, and that's the reason why most people did not see this coming. Yes, they had a lot of young talent, but young talent rarely performs to the degree that this young talent has, particularly in the playoffs. These kids, and that's what they are, they're kids, they look like seasoned, grizzled veterans. They certainly are playing like them. Did you notice watching the broadcast, dear listener? And I know every single one of you was watching Game 7 in Philadelphia. How many of the people on the field, part of their backstory over the course of the season was that they were playing in the minors. And not because they got hurt. They were playing in the minors because they were being brought up through the Arizona Diamondback minor league system and played well enough in the minors to earn a spot on the roster in the bigs, and then played well enough in the bigs on a team that was doing well, competing for a playoff spot, that they made the roster. The Arizona Diamondback franchise, the front office in particular, the ownership group in particular, they have some pretty hefty decisions to make no matter how this season turns out, because they've got a ton of young talent on that team, and all of that young talent's going to demand a pay raise as soon as they are arbitration eligible, as soon as they are contractually eligible. Living here in the Valley of the Sun for so long, close to 17 years, the biggest deal with the Arizona Diamondback franchise was who's going to be moved and when. And what kind of picks are they going to get, is the franchise going to get in exchange for that player? It wasn't whether or not you were going to be able to keep a nucleus of talent in Arizona. It was, how long can that good player stay given how crappy the team is? Now, if you are an owner of a baseball team, if you're a general manager of a baseball team, if you are the president of the baseball team, which problem would you rather have? How many great draft picks can I get for this player that we have to move because the team is terrible? Or how are we going to keep all of these great players on this team, a team that has barnstormed through the National League on its way to a World Series appearance? Am I getting a little ahead of myself? Yes, I am. I am excited to see what this team can become in the next 3 to 5 years. What about this year? You might be asking, dear listener. Yes, this year, the Texas Rangers, as I stated in the podcast where I picked the Texas Rangers to actually go to the World Series, dangerous team, don't like the matchup. The reality is, though, I'm not sure I would have said I liked the matchup any better if Houston was in the World Series. This team, this Arizona Diamondback team, they don't seem to care who they're playing, though. And that is the grace, the benefit of being that young. They don't care who's lining up against them. They are so happy to be in this position, and they are so unawares of the magnitude of the moment that they're probably ready to take on anyone that they line up against. I'm not going to do any kind of in-depth breakdown. I don't know what the point is. One of the things that came through me, though, and it was one of the big points that I wanted to make in this segment, is that the bullpen of a Major League Baseball team in the playoffs is akin to a goalie in the NHL or the goalies in the NHL on a playoff team. If a goalie gets hot, he can carry a team all the way to the Stanley Cup Championship, and we've seen it time and time again. Patrick Waugh did it a couple of different times with the Montreal Canadiens. Most recently, again with the Montreal Canadiens, Carey Price took a team that had no business being in the Eastern Conference Finals, much less in the Stanley Cup Finals. He helped a Montreal Canadian team that was an 8 seed go all the way to the finals. The reason why you hear that moniker, a hot goaltender, is because very often in the next season, or at least in the season after that, so that's 2 seasons removed from this goalie being unstoppable, being able to stand on his head, as the term of art is uttered in National Hockey League circles, that goalie can fall off precipitously in but 2 years, if not 1. So you really are, in the National Hockey League, riding a hot hand. Well, it just dawned on me, looking at the bullpen for the Arizona Diamondbacks and their parade through Major League Baseball, it's the same thing. You look at the Braves bullpen when they went to the World Series and they ended up winning it. You look at a lot of these other bullpens, the Houston bullpen last year. These bullpens are not always consistent with their numbers throughout the course of a baseball season or the course of their career. And the Arizona Diamondbacks are proving that, and they're proving that with exclamation points, right, demonstrably over the course of this playoff season. The Arizona Diamondback bullpen is absolutely lights out. And that's the advantage that I see going into this series with Texas. I mean, they shut down the Dodgers, then they shut down the Phillies. And let's be clear about the Phillies. This is a team that just out-hit the Braves, who were the number 1 offense in the history of Major League Baseball. They completely shut down some of the hottest hitters in Major League Baseball over the course of that 7-game series. That is not to say that the Texas Rangers bullpen isn't good or even great. They did not perform, well, they really didn't need to, but they certainly didn't perform consistent with what the Arizona Diamondbacks bullpen has done over the course of the 3 series leading up to the World Series. I have procured tickets to what will be my first World Series game. I've never been to a World Series game before, and I'm finally going. Granted, I would like it to be with the New York Metropolitans. That does not seem to be in any near future date, unfortunately, and it may not even be in any further future date, given the state of affairs in the National League East. See example Philadelphia Phillies, see example Atlanta Braves. So I'm taking what I can get. I'm rooting for the kids. I will be at Game 4 on Halloween night to root on the Arizona Diamondbacks.
Act 2 Native Americans, or the American Indian as it were, might have something to say about that.
Ken Burns just recently released a documentary on PBS. It's a 2-part documentary. It's 2 2-hour episodes, so a total of 4 hours of content on the American buffalo. I can't say that I agree with Ken Burns' politics. I've seen some of the things that he's got out there in the social medias, on the social media landscape, and I'm not always in agreement. Well, let me be specific. I'm rarely in agreement with his political views. What I love, though, about him as a documentarian, and what I love about his documentaries, is that he lets the story tell itself. He's adamant, he's passionate that he choose certain types of stories and that he let the story illustrate itself. He doesn't need to inject himself into the story to tell a great story. He's an artist in the sense that he knows how to choose the right story and then tell it from essentially all sides, or as many sides as are available that can be told in such a story. The American buffalo, that's a complicated story because there really isn't anyone that you can get to interview that's going to come in and say, here's the reason why we had to absolutely destroy this species off of the face of the earth. Let's be clear, dear listener, after watching the documentary, we, and I mean we as those people who were born and raised in the United States of America from ancestors that came over from England, from Germany, from Eastern Europe, we, with all intent and purpose, tried to exterminate the American buffalo from the continent. Some of it was greed, some of it was just ignorance. Some of it, though, was pure and utter intent, malice aforethought. And you've heard me say this, if you've listened to the podcast routinely, that I rarely buy into the malice aforethought approach to any situation or any problem. Because most people operate from a place of selfishness. Is that the right term? Being self-absorbed, they're just not aware. And therefore, they have a level, I'll spit it out, they have a level of ignorance. And that needs to be accounted for in looking at their actions. Because in our interpretation, if we are the third party being affected by those actions, we say they did it on purpose. And I rarely subscribe to that. In this case, there are letters, there are policies, there are well thought out strategies that were employed. And these strategies were to kill off all of the buffalo that could be killed off so that we could then cripple, we could strangle the American Indian, as it was known, the Native American, and remove them from the Western landscape. I fancy myself a history buff, a history nerd. I think I'm a pretty well-read guy, pretty smart guy. I had never, though, read so many of the letters and seen so much evidence, the body of evidence that existed, that the American government, particularly the American military, understood, and I mean to use that word intentionally, they understood this delicate yet intense relationship between the American buffalo and the Native American, that they were spiritually linked, that they were culturally linked, that they were, in an economic sense, linked, and that by killing off the buffalo, you then took away the agency, the independence of the Native American. So through military means, the use of the army, and economic means, hunters that would come out and shoot an inordinate amount of buffalo each day, the total number of buffalo diminished from 130 million. And I want you to think about that number, dear listener, because after watching the documentary, you realize it's probably pretty accurate. 130 million buffalo to, at one point, there were probably about 2,000 buffalo on the North American continent, and that includes Canada, that includes the United States. The buffalo, as we know it, the bison, if you've seen one in photos, and particularly if you've seen one in person, they were in Virginia. They were in North Carolina. They were in all of these eastern states when the colonists first came to the quote-unquote New World. And as European settlers began slowly moving west, they just killed off the buffalo as they went. Can you imagine that? That buffalo existed in a state like Virginia or North Carolina or even New York State, and that they were pushed steadily, if not killed, until they reached the plains where Lewis and Clark were the first ones to be exposed to the sheer volume of buffalo in states like Montana, in states like North and South Dakota, in northern Nebraska, in Wyoming. A systematic extermination of the buffalo in order to systematically exterminate the Native American population that was holding up the western expansion of the United States of America until we could get, and again, I'll use that colloquial term we, until we could get the remaining Native Americans on these smaller, limited reservations. I'm not here making indictments. This is what happened. This is history. And our ancestors, if you've ever done it at Ancestry.com and you looked and seen the people that you're related to, I am related to people that moved from the east to the quote-unquote west, the state being Texas, and were very likely involved in displacing Native Americans from their hereditary or ancestral hunting grounds. And there's arguments to be made about the extent to which these large swaths of land could be claimed by any Native American people. I don't want to get into all of that. The documentary does a very good job at showing the migration patterns of buffalo, and that because they were so large and the Native Americans followed those migration patterns, because again, the Native American was inextricably linked to the buffalo, it showed that the Native Americans considered these wide swaths of land to be part of our collective or our shared property. That they weren't looking at it like you could create four corners for a square and call that your own in spite of all of the other land that surrounded it. They didn't make sense to them. They didn't get that. I highly recommend that documentary. Now, the reason why I've gone into such detail talking about that documentary is it just struck me, and again, some of the things that come through me now, the paradox, it hits me again like an anvil, or it slaps me right across the face. Here we are as a nation, our government is getting more and more involved in what's happening in the Middle East, whether or not supporting Israel, whether or not supporting the civilian population in Gaza. And what are you looking at in that conflict between Israel and Palestine in the first place? You're looking at who can make claim to this ancestral land. Whose land is it really, right? Because both groups have an argument that they were displaced from their ancestral homeland. And here I am watching this documentary about the Native Americans and how our government systematically killed off the buffalo. And it is grotesque. When you watch the documentary and you see the lengths that the government went to, that commercial interest went to kill these buffalo, and then what they did with the buffalo after they killed them, it's grotesque. Why? Why did they do it? They wanted the land. So who really has a claim to ancestral land beyond that of the Native Americans of North America? In the documentary, there are a number of Native Americans that are interviewed, and it came through me while I was watching them. They are bitter, they are angry, they still have a lot of resentment, and I did not appreciate it. I did not look at it and say, I really understand and empathize with what that person's going through. The first thing that came through me was they're bitter. Now, I want you to think about that, dear listener. I'm someone that's trying to look at things from below instead of above. I'm someone who's trying to be better about the judgments, the preconceived notions, the programs that are running through me. And I use the word trying. I'd like to say I am. It's a work in progress. It's a work in progress for us all. And here I am, someone who considers himself a history buff, someone who believed that he understood fundamentally the relationship in the West between the Native Americans and the government, and someone who is in this quest, this journey to try to examine my own beliefs, my own unconscious programming. And when Native Americans are being interviewed, talking about the relationship that their ancestors had with the buffalo and with the land, and how the government came in and purposefully and knowingly and with malice aforethought systematically eliminated the buffalo, killed them in order to hamstring, in order to kill the Native Americans, I didn't have the empathy initially. I was off put. And I had to examine, why do you feel this way? Why do you feel this coming through you, watching someone who is feeling their ancestors' loss in real time for what this country was not 150 years ago? It's amazing when you watch the documentary about the same time that World War I is breaking out, and you're starting to see this division of traditional borders being destroyed in the Middle East. When I say traditional, I should probably make that clear. The Ottoman Empire, right? The Ottoman Empire that had ruled for, 400 years. So that's their traditional borders of what was in the Middle East. And you see Westerners come in and just draw up the lines as they see fit. That is the advent of the state of Israel and the relocation of those in the quote-unquote state of Palestine, if you can call it that. We're not talking about 500 years ago. We're talking about recent history. If you ask me 2 weeks ago, what is the ancestral history of those people living in Israel and those people living in Palestine, I certainly have sympathy for both groups, because at different periods of time, both groups had a claim to that land as their own. Neither of those claims, dear listener, is as recent as the claims that the Native Americans have to the land in the West being their ancestral home. Ponder that for a second. Ponder for a second that we are at the precipice of supporting a government that's going to commit a mass atrocity in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, based on the ancestral claims to that land. And that's just stating facts as well. There is no easy way for Israel to go in on the ground in Palestine and not shoot women and children and not kill innocent people. It can't be done. In that support of Israel, we are courting a war with Iran. We are now seeing the escalation that could lead to a global conflict. And yet on our home front, we have people who are just as bitter and resentful about what happened to them less than 150 years ago. Someone like me who considers themselves enlightened could look at it and say, they're just bitter. Get over it. In reflecting on this piece, in reflecting on what I was going to say, I have nothing but admiration for the Native American, because many people see them as bitter. Many people see them as resentful, and they continue to operate in a very gracious, graceful manner as Americans, as part of the American culture. They don't get out on social media and throw temper tantrums like so many other people are doing right now. It is as if they want to peaceably, to graciously try to educate all of their contemporaries on the North American continent of what happened, what actually happened to their people, and what actually happened to their land. I'm not trying to come out on one side or the other in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Whose land is whose and where should this person be versus that person be? It does, though, seem absurd to me that we could even have that conversation as a people, as a nation, and come out on one side or the other, and yet in our own country have a more contemporary version of those events that many of us ancestrally were complicit in. Never bat an eye at it, never think about it, and when confronted with it, say, these people are resentful, these people are bitter, just shut up about it. If the Israelis and the Palestinians, with ancestral claims that date back hundreds if not thousands of years, do not need to just shut up about it, where does that leave the Native American? That's right, dear listener. The Native American might just have something to say about it. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.